She called it just temporary. That was the word my daughter used when she asked if she and her husband could move in. Temporary. I remember nodding, thinking 6 months, maybe 8. I made up the guest room. I bought new towels. I told myself this was what mothers do. That was 3.5 years ago. I am 64 years old. I own a semi-detached home in Oakville, Ontario, a house I bought with my late husband 31 years ago, a house I have maintained alone since he passed, a house where I raised 2 children, repainted the kitchen 4 times, and planted the same rose bushes along the front walk every spring because they remind me that things come back even after a long winter. My name is not important. What happened in my living room on a Tuesday evening in February is I had come home from my part-time work at the library. I do 3 shifts a week, not because I need the income exactly, but because I need to be somewhere that makes sense to me, somewhere with order and quiet and the smell of old paper. I had picked up a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store on Kerr Street, the one near the plaza where my husband and I used to get coffee on Saturday mornings. I set my bag down by the door, hung up my coat on the hook I have had there since 1998, and walked into the living room to sit for a moment before starting dinner. My son-in-law was on the couch. Both cushions had been flattened on his side. He had the television at a volume I find uncomfortable. Not loud in a festive way, loud in a way that fills all the air in a room so there is no space left for thinking. He was watching something with a lot of shouting. I sat in the armchair by the window. It is a wingback chair, oatmeal-colored, and it was a gift from my sister the Christmas after my husband died. I sit in it every evening. There is an indent in the left armrest where my elbow always rests. He did not look up. I reached for the remote on the side table, my side table, the one with the small brass lamp and the coaster I have used for 20 years, and I turned the volume down 3 notches. Not off. 3 notches. He looked up then. "I was watching that," he said. "I know," I said. "I just needed it a little lower." He said nothing. He picked up his phone. I thought that was the end of it. Then he stood up, walked across the room, picked up the remote from where I had set it back down, and turned the volume up, past where it had been, not to where it was. Past it. He sat back down, did not look at me once. I sat very still. There is a particular kind of humiliation that comes not from being yelled at, but from being treated as though you are furniture, as though your preference in a room is no more significant than the preference of the lamp. That is what that moment felt like. Not rage, erasure. I got up and went to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a while without doing anything. My daughter came home an hour later. She is 36. She works in project coordination for a firm downtown Toronto. She is capable and organized and, in the years since she married him, has become very good at not seeing certain things. She asked me if I was all right. I said yes. She went upstairs. I reheated the chicken. I ate alone. I washed the dish. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in my room, the room I have slept in for 31 years, and I listened to the television downstairs, which was still on at midnight, still at that volume, and I thought about what it means to own something. I thought about the mortgage I finished paying in 2019. I thought about the winter I had ice damming on the roof and called 3 contractors before finding one I trusted. I thought about the summer I repainted the front porch myself, on my hands and knees because I wanted the gray to be exactly right. I thought about the fact that my son-in-law has never once paid rent, never offered. My daughter had, twice, brought it up in that careful, circling way she has, and both times he redirected the conversation and both times she let him. I had told myself it was fine, that they were saving, that it was temporary. I knew, lying there at midnight listening to his television, that I had been telling myself a story that was not true. The second thing happened 11 days later. My sister Pauline was visiting from Kingston. She comes a few times a year. We are close in the way that sisters become close after they have both been through difficult things. She was staying for the weekend. I had made up the guest room, which is technically the room my son-in-law had been using as a home office, though I had asked him 2 weeks prior if we could use it for the weekend, and he had said fine. Saturday morning, Pauline and I were sitting at the kitchen table with tea. It was early, maybe 8:15. The house was quiet. We were talking about our mother who has been unwell and what the next steps might look like for her care. It was not a light conversation, but it was an important one, and it felt good to have it in my own kitchen with my sister. My son-in-law came downstairs at 8:40. He opened the fridge, took out the orange juice, the carton I had just bought, and poured himself a glass without acknowledging either of us. Then he leaned against the counter and looked at his phone. I introduced him to Pauline, even though they had met before. He nodded. Then he said, without looking up from his phone, "When is she leaving?" Pauline heard it. I know she did because her hand went still on her mug. I said, "She's staying until Sunday evening." He made a sound, not a word, a sound, and he went back upstairs. Pauline looked at me. She did not say anything. She did not have to. That evening, after dinner, after my son-in-law had gone out and my daughter had gone to bed early with a headache, the headaches had been more frequent lately, I noticed. Pauline and I sat in the living room and she asked me, quietly, how long this had been going on. I started to say, "It's not that bad." I stopped myself, because I was tired of saying that. I told her the truth instead, all of it, the volume on the television, the way he walked through rooms as though they belonged to him, the way my daughter had stopped making eye contact with me when he was in the room, the way I had started timing my own movements in my own home, coming downstairs when I thought he was out, eating quickly when he was in the kitchen, retreating to my room earlier and earlier each evening. Pauline listened to all of it. Then she said, "You know you don't have to do this." I said, "She's my daughter." "Yes," she said, "and this is your house." I did not do anything immediately. I want to be honest about that. There was a period of about 3 weeks where I went back and forth in the way that I think most mothers go back and forth when the person causing harm is connected to someone they love. I thought about my daughter. I thought about what it would mean for their marriage if I asked them to leave. I thought about where they would go. I ran numbers in my head. A 2-bedroom apartment in the west end of the city runs somewhere between $2,200 and $2,600 a month, sometimes more, which is not nothing, but it is also not impossible for 2 people with incomes. I called my friend Rosalind, who has been through a divorce and a second marriage and has, over the years, become very clear-eyed about these things. She listened. Then she asked me one question. "Do you feel safe in your own home?" I did not answer right away. That pause was its own answer. She said, "Then you already know what you need to do." I also called my son, who lives in Calgary. He is younger than my daughter by 3 years. He is a calm person, practical, not given to dramatics. I told him what had been happening and he listened, and at the end he said, "Mum, under Ontario law, are they tenants or are they guests?" I said I didn't know. I hadn't thought about it that way. He said I should find out. I called a lawyer. Her name is not important, but her office is in downtown Oakville, and she has been practicing family and property law for over 20 years. I made the appointment myself, which sounds like a simple thing, but felt, at the time, like an enormous act. I was afraid of what it would mean to take this step, not afraid of her, but afraid of myself. Afraid of becoming someone who did this to her own daughter. The lawyer was precise and unhurried. She explained that in Ontario, when someone lives in your home without a formal lease agreement, the nature of their occupancy can be complicated, but that as a homeowner, I had options. She said the word occupants. She said the process for asking them to leave would depend on how we characterized the arrangement, but that what I was describing, no written agreement, no rent paid, no term established, was not a standard tenancy. She said I should document. She said I should be clear about my intentions in writing. She said I should not do this in anger and I should not do this alone. She also said, "You are not doing anything wrong by wanting to live in your own home." I had not known I needed to hear that until I heard it. I went home that evening and sat in my armchair. My son-in-law was out. My daughter was in the kitchen. I could hear her moving around, the sound of a pot, the hiss of water. Ordinary sounds. I looked at the room. The walls I had painted a warm ivory 4 years ago. The shelves with my books and my husband's books mixed together the way they always were. The small photograph on the mantel of the two of us at Lake Louise the summer before he got sick. This room was mine. It had been mine. And I had slowly, without ever saying yes to it, let it become something else. I had a conversation with my daughter that night. I had planned to be very careful and measured, and I was, for the most part. I told her that I had been finding the living arrangement difficult. I told her I thought it was time for them to start making a plan to find their own place. I told her I was giving them 3 months, which was more than enough time given their incomes and the rental market, and that I wanted it in writing. She started to cry. I sat with that. I did not change what I had said. She said he was going to be angry. I said, "I know. That's not something I can manage for you." She looked at me in a way I hadn't seen her look at me in a long time, like I was someone she didn't entirely recognize. I didn't know if that was good or bad. I think it was both. My son-in-law came home at 9:30. My daughter had clearly spoken to him because he came into the living room where I was reading, and he stood in the doorway, and he said, in a very controlled voice that I knew was controlled because the effort was visible, "So you're kicking us out." I put my book down. I said, "I'm asking you to find your own home. I'm giving you 3 months, and I'm happy to put that in writing tonight, if that helps." He said, "We've been here 3.5 years. I said, "Yes, and I'm grateful you're willing to count." He said some other things. His voice got less controlled as he went. He talked about how ungrateful I was, which I found interesting. He talked about how hard they had worked, which was true, though I wasn't sure what that had to do with my living room. He said something about how this was going to destroy my relationship with my daughter. I waited until he was finished. I said, "I've spoken to a lawyer. There will be a written notice by end of week. The timeline is 3 months. I hope we can do this without making it harder than it needs to be." He left the room. A door upstairs closed. Not quite a slam, but near enough. I sat for a while in the quiet. Then I picked up my book. I did not read it, but I held it. The written notice went out on a Friday. My daughter signed the acknowledgement. My son-in-law did not, but my lawyer said that was fine. There were other ways to establish receipt. There were difficult weeks. My daughter barely spoke to me for the first month. My son-in-law was icily polite in the way that some people are when they have decided to be aggrieved as their full-time occupation. Meals were navigated around each other. I started eating lunch at the library on my shift days and making simple dinners I could eat quickly. My son called every week. Pauline called more than that. At the end of month 2, my daughter came to me on a Saturday morning. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and she said, "We found a place. In Hamilton. 2-bedroom. We're moving in 6 weeks." I said, "That's good. I'm glad." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know things got bad here. I know some of that was him, and I know some of it was me letting it happen." That is the most she has ever said about it. It was enough. They moved out on a Saturday in early May. My son-in-law did not say goodbye to me. My daughter hugged me at the door for a long time, and I held on, and I told her I loved her, and she said she loved me too, and I believed both of us. I stood at the front door and watched the moving truck pull away. It was one of those May mornings in Ontario that almost makes you forget what February felt like. The air was cool and clear. The maple in the front yard was just coming into its new leaves, and the rose bushes I had planted last April were showing the first small red growth along their canes. I went back inside. I walked into the living room. I opened the window because the room needed air. It had needed air for a long time, I thought. I rearranged the cushions on the couch back to the way I have always kept them. The blue one in the corner, the two cream ones stacked. I put the remote back on my side table next to the brass lamp and the coaster. I made tea. I sat in my armchair in the indent that has always been there, in the morning light coming through the window that faces east, and I turned on the radio at the volume I have always kept it, low enough to be company, low enough to let me think. Outside, the maple dropped a slow handful of seeds, those little helicopter things that drift and spin and land wherever they land. I thought about my husband. I thought about my daughter in a new apartment in Hamilton, starting something that might be better or might not, but would at least be her own. I thought about what it had cost me to do what I had done, and what it would have cost me not to. My lawyer had said, "You are not doing anything wrong by wanting to live in your own home." I had written it down after that appointment on a small piece of paper I keep in the drawer of my bedside table. I have read it several times since then. It sounds simple. It is not simple, but it is true. I finished my tea. I rinsed the mug. I went out to check on the rose bushes. They were going to be fine. I have thought a lot in the months since about how things become what they are. Not in a grand philosophical way, just in the quiet, practical way you think when you are 64 and you have lived long enough to watch cause and effect play out in real time, in your own kitchen, in your own living room, in the slow accumulation of small moments that you told yourself didn't matter. Here is what I know now. Every time I turned down the volume on what was happening, I turned up the permission, not because I was weak. I don't think I was weak. I think I was doing what a lot of mothers do. I was protecting the peace at the cost of my own. And that works for a while. And then one day, someone picks up the remote and turns the volume past where it was and looks through you like you are not there, and you understand that the peace you were protecting was never peace at all. It was just a quieter kind of erasure. I am not angry at myself for taking so long. That's the honest truth. What I did took what it took. I needed Pauline to sit across from me at my kitchen table and ask how long this had been going on. I needed Rosalind to ask me, plainly, whether I felt safe in my own home. I needed my son, calm and practical from Calgary, to ask whether they were tenants or guests, because that question reframed everything. I needed all of those conversations before I could walk into a lawyer's office and say, "This is my house, and I need to know my options." Dignity is not something you either have or you don't. It is something you practice, and sometimes practicing it means doing the uncomfortable thing, the thing that will make someone cry, the thing that will make someone else leave a room and close a door a little too hard. Sometimes practicing it means writing a date on a piece of paper and handing it to someone and saying, "This is when things change." I think about my daughter sometimes and what it must have cost her too in ways I may not fully understand. She is living her own life now, making her own choices in a 2-bedroom apartment in Hamilton. I don't know everything about what happens in that apartment, but I know that the morning she told me they had found a place, she also told me she knew some of what had happened was her letting it happen. That took something. I don't take it lightly. What I want to say, if you are sitting somewhere right now and something in this story felt familiar, is this: The moment you recognize what is happening is not a crisis, it is information. And information, unlike silence, gives you something to work with. You are allowed to want to live in your own home. You are allowed to eat dinner without timing yourself. You are allowed to have the volume at the level that makes sense to you. Those are not large things to want. They are the smallest, most ordinary things, and sometimes the most ordinary things are the ones that take the most courage to ask for. I went and checked on my rose bushes this morning. They are coming in well.